Hello everyone and welcome back to this Delta Module 1 video series. This is part 2 of how to analyze verb phrases, the language items you are most likely to encounter in paper 1 task 5. And for good reason, they're more analytically complex than any others, often seeming like you're navigating a rabbit warren with many different interconnecting tunnels. In part 1, we made our way through the various lines of analysis related to verb phrases and modal verbs in the main clause, and which follow the subject, as well as gerunds, infinitives, and participles. And if you haven't watched that video yet, it's a good idea to do so now so this all makes a lot more sense. Otherwise, stay with me as we continue to delve deeper into multi-word verbs and ing forms.
You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
To quickly recap part 1 of this video, a verb phrase can be considered as a sequence of one or more verbs. And we looked at analyzing auxiliaries with main verbs, gerunds, infinitives, and participles. Now let's move on to multi-word verbs. I never make up stuff in my videos. I never make stuff up in my videos. And in task 5 of the exam, it will be worded as such. Comment on the form and use of the multi-word verbs in bold. From the June 2014 exam, we can see this realized as part C of task 5. Look at the following extracts from the text, comment on the form of the multi-word verbs in bold. Taken off, turned up, pay for. And you will notice here that it says form, not form and use, which is often the case with multi-word verbs because there is a lot more to be said about the form, not so much on use. For ing forms, it's likely to be worded as comment on the form and use of the ing forms in bold. And we can see examples here, making being a present participle, making being a gerund, having being a present participle. From the June 2016 exam, comment on the form and use of the ing forms in bold. Simmering water, whisking occasionally, sticking to the bottom before eating. These three are present participles, but simmering is in fact an adjective. And ing forms are popular with Delta exam writers because they can take many different forms and therefore serve to make you think a little bit deeper about what you're actually analyzing. So let's start by defining what a multi-word verb actually is. It's a verb plus one or more particles.
Oh, come on!
I hear you say, I thought it was a verb plus preposition. That's what all the course books say. They do, and for good reason. It's more for the benefit of the students and for general simplicity. And we'll break down any ambiguity arising from that in a moment. First off, particles in multi-word verbs are what we consider to be prepositions or adverbs in other linguistic contexts. But here they're intrinsically part of the structure. Similar to is a particle in the full infinitive structure, as in I want to have, or the particle to, as in have to, the semi-modal of obligation. I have to study. These particles have no meaning in and of themselves, but rather serve to complete the structure. You will often see multi-word verbs referred to as phrasal verbs or prepositional verbs. Let's look at some examples. I never make up stuff in my videos. This is a phrasal verb meaning to invent. And up is an adverb particle, specifically adverb of place particle. The addition of this adverb particle up changes the meaning of make from to create something to invent something. Similarly, I look up stuff I'm not sure of, which is a lot of the time, and this is a phrasal verb meaning to search for and find. Again, the adverb particle up is changing the meaning of the verb look. Listen to the rest of this video. This is a prepositional verb which uses the prepositional particle to. And prepositional verbs usually retain the meaning of the verb. Listen does not take on a new meaning here because of this prepositional particle. And watch out for tricky phrasal prepositional verbs like this. So we said a verb plus one or more particles. Here we have two particles, an adverb particle and a prepositional particle. And again, the meaning of watch is changed to something like be aware of. As a multi-word verb, I look up stuff I'm not sure of in a grammar book. Up is an adverb particle. And look out for any contradictions. Out is an adverb particle. If we change this adverb particle, we are changing the meaning of the whole phrasal verb. This now means to take notice as opposed to search for and find. I look up stuff I'm not sure of in a grammar book. Then I look up blankly, wondering what to type on my computer screen. Here, up is an adverb. It's not a particle. And therefore, this is not considered a multi-word verb. It's not considered a phrasal verb. It's simply verb plus adverb. Specifically, adverb of place, or sometimes called adverb of direction. Now, we know this isn't a particle and not inherently part of this structure because we can ask questions about it. For example, in which direction do I look? Up. Try applying the same question to a multi-word verb. I look up stuff I'm not sure of. In which direction do I look? Up. We can't ask this question. It's nonsensical because up is an adverb particle. Another way we can check this is by substituting this adverb of place or direction for other similar adverbs. Then I look up blankly. Then I look left blankly. Then I look forward blankly. These all make grammatical sense and therefore confirm that we are looking at a verb plus a separate adverb. Then I look up blankly, wondering what to type on my computer screen, before looking up the chimney, wondering if Santa Claus really exists. Because that's what normal people do.
Under the tree, we'll be crawling round on all fours, just you and me and Santa Claus.
Here, up is a preposition, and again, it's not a multi-word verb, it's a separate verb plus preposition. Specifically, preposition of place answers the question where. Unlike the adverb, it doesn't explicitly state the directionality information. So, where do I look? Up the chimney. And you're probably thinking, well, isn't that in an upwards direction? Probably. But suppose for whatever reason the chimney is on its side and you're peering through the bottom end, you could still be considered to be looking up the chimney even though it's on a horizontal plane. Similarly, if the chimney is intact and if I lie down on my back and gaze through the shaft of it from bottom to top, my eyes are looking in a forward direction relative to there and my head's position. I'm looking up the chimney, but I'm not looking upwards. And if you don't believe me, as with up, the adverb, we can substitute it with other prepositions of place to check. Where do I look? Up the chimney. Where do I look? In the chimney. This makes grammatical sense. Try to do that with the adverb. Then I look in blankly. In which direction do I look? In. This is not a direction and therefore cannot be substituted in this example. Something also to bear in mind is that the preposition links the verb with the noun phrase that follows. And you may well be asked just to comment on these little function words as they are a bit tricky, but we'll look at that in another video. So here, up is an adverb particle, look up is a multi-word verb, specifically a phrasal verb. Here, up is an adverb, here, up is a preposition. So now that we've established what a multi-word verb is or isn't, let's go through what are generally considered the four main types. And these are categorized based on their transitivity and separability. Transitivity being whether they can take a direct object, and separability being whether or not they could be separated by the object. And we'll consider these as type 1 to type 4. Type 1, intransitive. I got up early to record this video. Phrasal verb meaning to rise from bed. This cannot take a direct object, therefore intransitive. I got up early to record this video and set out to do a good job. Whether or not I did, I'll leave you to decide. Both of these are phrasal verbs, meaning to rise from bed and to intend, respectively, and they cannot take a direct object, therefore intransitive. Quick side note here that multi-word verbs are often also homonyms, meaning they are spelt and pronounced the same but have different meanings. For example, in we set out on foot for Mordor, set out means to begin a journey, not to intend. Type 2, transitive inseparable. You can get around a period of extended study by just cramming the night before the exam. This is a prepositional verb meaning to avoid. So here, the object is the noun phrase, a period of extended study, and get around is a prepositional verb. Get around is inseparable because we can't put this object in between the two parts. You can get a period of extended study around by just blah blah. Can't be done. And we can see this a bit easier if we replace the object with a pronoun. You can get around it by just cramming the night before. Makes sense. You can get it around by just cramming the night before is word salad. Now, if you're wondering how to figure out whether this is a preposition particle or an adverb particle, then remember this. If the pronoun cannot separate the multi-word verb, then that particle is a preposition, not an adverb. As in this example, you can turn around your fortunes by studying hard from the outset. Here, around is an adverb, because if we change the object into a pronoun, it, and write, you can turn it around by studying hard from the outset, it is grammatically correct. And this is in fact type 3. So I mentioned before that prepositional verbs often don't change the meaning of the verb, as in listen to. However, in this example, get around, the meaning of the verb is changed, meaning to avoid. You can get around a period of extended study by just cramming the night before the exam. I take back what I just said. This is definitely not good advice. And take back is an example of a transitive separable multi-word verb, which is type 3. Phrasal verb meaning to retract a statement. It still takes a direct object, but when we turn that into a pronoun, we can separate the two parts, as in, I take that back. In fact, if the object is a pronoun, in this case a demonstrative pronoun, it must be used to separate the phrasal verb and cannot come after it, as in, I take back that. Another example, I find out new stuff all the time. Phrasal verb meaning to discover. And if we put the object between the two parts, we end up with, I find new stuff out all the time. Still transitive, even though the object doesn't come after the multi-word verb. And type 4 is transitive plus two particles. You should get around to memorizing the Delta terminology list before it's too late. Phrasal prepositional verb meaning to deal with something not yet done. Type 4 is always inseparable, and the first particle is always an adverb particle, the second one a prepositional particle. Type 1 and 3 are always phrasal verbs. Type 2 are prepositional verbs, and type 4 are phrasal prepositional verbs. Prepositional verbs cannot be separated, phrasal verbs can be. With all this in mind, let's now look at how we would analyze multi-word verbs according to their form and use. And we'll contextualize this by listening to a description of fictional teacher Tom's least favorite class. And I'm sure we've all had similar classes like this at one point or another. So starting with form of multi-word verbs, this is where most of the marks are going to come from. And right off the bat, we want to identify the type. Is it phrasal prepositional or phrasal prepositional? Tom has to put up with a lot from his students. Phrasal prepositional verb meaning to tolerate. Now in the exam, you likely won't need to comment on the lexical meaning of the verb unless specifically asked to in the rubric. I've just included it here for reference. They can be a nightmare, but he never gives up even when they're at their worst. Phrasal verb meaning to stop making an effort. He's frequently not listened to. Prepositional verb. And recently, now that it's summer, they've been complaining about the classroom temperature. Complain about is also a prepositional verb. When he turns up the aircon, they complain that it's too cold. He can't win. Phrasal verb meaning to increase. And you might be thinking, is this not an adverb as opposed to an adverb particle? Can we not ask the question, in which direction does he turn the aircon? He turns it up? Well, no, because he's not physically turning something like a lever in an upward direction. He's probably pressing a button with an up arrow on it or rotating a dial clockwise. And they always forget to turn off their phones. Phrasal verb meaning to stop operation of. Last week, using them to cheat after he'd looked around the class during a test. This is not a multi-word verb. Around is a preposition of place, not a prepositional particle, and answers the question, where did he look? Around. Around what? Around the classroom. It isn't an adverb as it isn't referring to direction, and we can't replace it with left or right, for example. He looked left the class. He looked right the class. We can't say it that way. But we can replace it with another preposition, for example, at, after he'd looked at the class during the test. Despite all this, they've always looked forward to his lessons, and so has he. Phrasal prepositional verb meaning to expect with pleasure. So these are a mixture of type 1, 2, 3, and 4, and an example of something which looks like a multi-word verb, but is in fact not. 2. Identify the constituents. Verb plus adverb particle plus prepositional particle. In type 4, the first particle is always considered an adverb, the second always a preposition. Gives up. Verb plus adverb particle. Listen to. Verb plus prepositional particle. Complaining about. The same. Turns up. Verb plus adverb particle. Turn off. The same. Looked around. Verb plus preposition, not prepositional particle, as we said before. Look forward to. Verb, adverb particle, prepositional particle. 3. Note any larger structures it is part of. He's frequently not listened to. Well, this is in the passive voice, so we can note it here. Have been complaining. Part of present perfect continuous. Had looked. Part of past perfect simple. Have looked, part of present perfect simple. 4. Identify the verb form. Put is in the bare infinitive form as it follows the semi-modal has to. Gives is in the present simple, third person singular. He gives. Listened is a past participle because it's in the passive voice. Complaining is a present participle. Turns as above. To turn is a full infinitive as it follows the main verb forget. Looked in the bottom two are both past participles. Now, since multi-word verbs can come in any form, infinitives, gerunds, participles, there may be more points to make about form in use, but those are all discussed in part 1 of this video, so check that out if you're not sure. 5. Note the regularity of the verb as shown. So we're not stating whether or not the verb is inherently regular or irregular, but the form that we see it as. Put is in the bare infinitive form, so this doesn't show whether it's regular or irregular. Gives, although give is an irregular verb, give, gave, given, here we are seeing a regular form of the third person present simple. However, if this was a past participle, he has never given up, that is now an irregular form because it doesn't have the ed suffix. Listened is regular because it does have the ed suffix. Present participles only have one form, so neither regular nor irregular. He turns up, regular. Doesn't apply to full infinitives. And looked is also regular. 6. Note whether separable or inseparable. So we said before, type 4, type 1 and type 2 are always inseparable. But when we get down to type 3, we can say it's separable. When he turns up the aircon, when he turns the aircon up. They always forget to turn off their phones. They always forget to turn their phones off. Separable. Looked around is not a multi-word verb. Around is not a particle, therefore separability does not apply, as they are inherently separate already. And look forward to type 4 is inseparable. Let's move on to the use of multi-word verbs. And with any verbs, we can talk about their transitivity if in the active voice or use of an agent if in the passive voice. Type 4 are always transitive. And though this might not appear to be a direct object, it's because we've got some ellipsis going on here. He puts up with a lot of crap from his students. He puts up with a lot of nonsense. Those elliptic words, whatever they are still considered the object and therefore transitive. Type 1, always intransitive. Listen to is in the passive and it's used without an agent because it's obvious. He's frequently not listened to by his students. We already know this from context. They've been complaining about the classroom temperature. Transitive. When he turns up the aircon. Transitive. Turn off their phones. Transitive. Now, because looked around is not a multi-word verb, the verb look is followed by the prepositional phrase around the class during a test and therefore doesn't take a direct object. Intransitive. Look forward to type 4, always transitive. So let's now apply this to the real world example we looked at the beginning. Has never taken off commercially. Taken off is a phrasal verb, meaning to become popular. And remember, it's likely you don't need to add this second part, unless it asks you to here. Verb plus adverb particle off. Part of present perfect simple. Taken is past participle of take. And you could probably just write past participle here because it's obvious that you're referring to the verb. Taken is irregular. And the phrasal verb is inseparable and is being used intransitively because it is type 1. To allow office thermostats to be turned up slightly. Turned up is a phrasal verb meaning to increase. As we saw earlier with turn up the aircon, up is not referring to a direction, but rather changes the meaning of the verb turn to increase. Verb plus adverb particle up. Passive, past participle, regular, separable, because if we wrote this in the active, we could say to allow people to turn office thermostats up slightly. And it's being used without an agent because it's unnecessary. Turned up by who? Office workers, whoever happens to be in the office at that time. Unnecessary. These systems would pay for themselves. Prepositional verb or type 2. Verb plus prepositional particle for. Pay is a bare infinitive as it's used after the modal would. Inseparable and being used transitively because the direct object here, themselves. Multi-word verbs done. Let's move on to our ing forms. And here there will be a lot of crossover from part 1 of this video where we discussed gerunds and present participles, which are also both ing forms. However, ing forms can also be other parts of speech. And the first step in analyzing them is to identify said part of speech. Now let's imagine a future in which you've passed the exam and you're now reminiscing about the awesome time you had in preparing for it. It was a period of enlightening study. This is an adjective. Where our group held a meeting every week to converse about all things Delta. Now, during that time we enjoyed discussing language analysis, gerund, whilst making our preparations for the exam, present participle. Study every day, revising constantly to ensure success. That was our daily mantra. Present participle. And then after we hit a stumbling block, adjective, which is the first component of the compound noun stumbling block, and worth noting here also, we came across a channel bearing the title Delta Success. Present participle. A little on the nose perhaps, but not outside the realms of possibility that this could happen. 2. Identify any spelling changes made to the base form of the verb. So all ing forms, be they verbs, adjectives or nouns, are derived from an original base form of the verb. Base verb enlighten plus ing suffix. Base verb meet plus ing suffix. And the same for discussing, making. With making, just note that there's a minus e in there as well, as is the case with revising and stumbling, and bearing just with the standard ing suffix. Now, a couple of things to bear in mind. If the base verb itself is clearly derived from another root, i.e. enlighten comes from the root light, then it's also worth commenting on here, as in root light plus en prefix and en suffix. And also if the base verb ends in a consonant which is preceded by a single vowel, that consonant is typically doubled, as in we found ourselves hitting a stumbling block. Doubling of consonant T because it is preceded by the single vowel I, all part of the CVC consonant vowel consonant pattern. And in this case you should justify the reason for the doubling to ensure you get the mark. And in the case of the dropping of the E, here you may also need to justify why the E is dropped to get the mark, or you may get an additional mark for it, so probably worth including either way. E is dropped when base ends in an E and suffix starts with a vowel, suffix being ing. 3. If present participle, note that it is non-finite, as in the case with making, revising, and bearing. If gerund as an object, note the verb pattern it is part of. Here, discussing is the object of the verb enjoyed, and therefore is part of the verb pattern noun, verb, ing form. Technically a pronoun, but still follows this verb pattern. If it's a noun, then note the number and countability. A meeting is singular and it's countable. Our group held meetings, this is plural and countable. Moving on to points related to use. If it's an adjective, note the noun it modifies. Enlightening pre-modifies the noun study. And you need to be specific here. You need to write the noun and then the example to get the mark. Now, stumbling is a little different here because stumbling block is a compound noun with one somewhat idiomatic meaning of a circumstance which causes difficulty or hesitation. It's not pre-modifying the noun block like big wood in a big block, but rather is being used as the first element or component of a compound noun. Now, something to be aware of here, if we change this slightly to it was a period of enlightening study sessions. Now, sessions is the new head of the noun phrase enlightening study sessions, and therefore enlightening pre-modifies the noun sessions, not study. Study is now what's called an attributive noun, so it acts as an adjective and also pre-modifies sessions. And if we change this again, it was an amazing period of enlightening study. This is now a larger noun phrase, the head of which is period, and so amazing pre-modifies the noun period, which is being post-modified by the prepositional phrase of enlightening study. 2. If noun or gerund, note its use as a subject or object. Our group held a meeting. This is the object of the verb held. We enjoyed discussing, and we said before this gerund is also an object. Now, if it's a present participle, we need to go a little bit deeper. So first off, 3a, note its use as part of a participle clause. Each of these are participle clauses, and as they start with a present participle, they are all part of a present participle clause. They may have originally been relative clauses or adverbial clauses, but these have now been reduced down to present participle clauses. Next up, again, if it's a present participle, it's behaving like a verb, and therefore we should note its transitivity, making our preparations transitive, revising constantly intransitive. Compare that with revising lots of books to ensure success. That would be transitive. Bearing the title delta success, transitive. C, if used as part of a reduced adverbial clause, note the preceding conjunction, used after subordinating conjunction whilst. D, if used as part of a reduced relative clause, comment on the type of information it provides, i.e. essential or non-essential. As this is a reduced defining relative clause, it provides additional essential information about the noun channel. E, identify what is being ellipted or that it is more concise than writing something else. Present participles are all about making writing more concise. Whilst making our preparations is more concise than writing whilst we made our preparations. Not by much, but it is still fewer words. Study every day, revising constantly. We are ellipting while. Study every day while revising constantly. We came across a channel which bore the title Delta Success. More concise than writing which bore, or we could say ellipsis of which was bearing the title Delta Success. And 3 extra related points to consider here about use may or may not apply, and we looked at these in length in part A of this video. 4. Note whether it is delexicalized. Check adjacent words to see if it's part of a common collocation. Check to see if it's part of a fixed expression or idiom. Held a meeting is part of a verb noun collocation, hold a meeting. These 2 words are frequently seen together and are therefore collocates. Making our preparations. Making is delexicalized as the meaning is derived from the following noun, preparations. And we could just say whilst preparing for the exam. And you could say hold here is also delexicalized as it takes the meaning from the following noun, where our group met every week to converse, blah, blah, blah. Stumbling is part of the idiom stumbling block, meaning a circumstance which causes difficulty or hesitation. And you could potentially say that bearing is part of the fixed expression bearing the title. Let's go back to our example from June 2016, a pan of simmering water. Simmering is an adjective, the base verb simmer plus the ing suffix, and it pre-modifies the noun water. Not much more to say here. Adjectives have relatively low analytical potential. Bring slowly to the boil, whisking occasionally to prevent the cocoa powder sticking to the bottom of the saucepan. We've got 2 ing forms embedded in this sentence. The first, whisking, is a present participle, base verb whisk plus ing suffix. It's non-finite. It's being used as part of a present participle clause. It's transitive and more concise than writing while whisking it. It is the object which has been ellipted here. However, we can say whisking still retains its transitivity. Sticking is a present participle. Base verb stick plus ing suffix. Non-finite. It's part of a present participle clause. And more concise than the passive causative structure from getting stuck, which is how it would read if we didn't use a present participle clause. Now, because this present participle clause still retains that passive meaning, we should also note that it's used without an agent because it's unnecessary. So the full original clause might have read something like, from getting stuck to the bottom of the saucepan by the heat. Once churned, leave for 3 to 4 days before eating. Eating is a present participle. Base verb eat plus ing suffix. It's non-finite. It's not part of a present participle clause. It is the clause, a one-word clause. It's preceded by the subordinating conjunction before. It's transitive. Ellipsis of it. It is the object which makes it transitive. Or we could write more concise than you eat it, before you eat it. And that about wraps up part 2 of how to analyze verb phrases, which should have covered all your verbal analytical needs. In the next video on Paper 1 Task 5, we'll be looking at a very different group of language items which the Delta exam writers like to throw into the mix, those being cohesive words. Think articles, pronouns, adverbs. See you then for more language analysis.